We just had to talk to two people.
Okay, good morning and welcome to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning as newly reconstituted by our brand new chairman. I really don't have a whole lot of remarks regarding any overview. I would advise you that we are being broadcast live worldwide and all across Texas. And only the latter is important. And I would ask you, like I am, is to check your cell phones to mute only or turn them off. I would bring up agenda item number 2, which is consideration of approval of our minutes from the September 23rd meeting. Is there a motion for approval? Javid moves.
Second.
Janelle seconds. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 3, consideration of our consent calendar. There are no items on the consent calendar. I am so sad. Anyone want to offer any items to the consent calendar? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is public testimony. We do not have anyone registered for public testimony. We'll move on to agenda item 5A, consideration of the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the approval of facilities audit report. Mr. Tom Keaton, our Director of Funding, has a brief report and will answer any questions. Tom, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Welcome to the dais.
Good morning. Each year, all institutions of higher education across the state, with the exception of community colleges, submit a facilities inventory, comprehensive facilities inventory to the coordinating board. They also go through a process for the approval of their capital development projects. In order to verify the accuracy of those data and processes, TEC 61.0583 directs the coordinating board to conduct a comprehensive facilities audit. In 2006, the coordinating board collaborated with institutions to create the audit protocol that we use today. That protocol includes 2 parts: a capital development projects review, which is done by the internal auditor of the higher education institution in question, and the peer review team, which is conducted by institutional peers and a member of the coordinating board staff. Institutions are set up on a 5-year cycle. The data points reported are verified by the PRT. They actually go on site and review, essentially conduct the facilities inventory and check the results based off of a 35-room random sample that we provide. Each random sample contains at least 10 class laboratories and class labs because those do serve as a bellwether for overall space use. The types of data points that we look at are the type of room, the user of the room, how the room is used, and the square footage and the capacity of classrooms and class laboratories. All institutions are given comprehensive feedback at the end of the audit, and if it's found that the data aren't sufficiently accurate, the coordinating board staff will conduct staff assistance visits as requested and will help them to link up with peers in the group that will help them to mitigate any errors. With that, the results of the first 5-year cycle are completed with the report you have before you. In January of this year, we started on the second 5-year cycle. Subject to your questions.
Mr. Keaton, I have a question. I noticed, I've reviewed the reports, and I've noticed that Texas A&M University, Central Texas, marginally passed the audit, and the others seem to comply. Is there any particular reason?
Well, there is. When we get the data, the working group came up with a 5-point Likert scale that the data are grouped on. When they find it, for instance, if it's 10 to 15%, it would receive a 2. If it's less than 10% variance, it would receive a 1. In many, and that's one example. It varies based on data point. If they come in at 81% overall, or they may have a 3 in some areas. We consider them passing, but we want to make sure we send a clear signal that any little change could result in you dropping out of a compliance portion. So they're accurate enough to pass, but we certainly want them to be a little bit, to have some data points, some increases in their processes to help get more accurate data.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Shepard?
I have a question about University of North Texas and had to have a third review. Is that correct?
That would University of North Texas at Dallas, ma'am?
Right,
Okay,
Dallas.
yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. So what was the reason, and what did they finally do to get past the threshold?
Well, and I was actually present at 2 of those personally. Being a new institution, you've got it at certain times. It's kind of like herding cats. And one of the things that falls off when you just have 2 buildings is you know where Ms. Shepard's office is.
But you don't document it.
But you don't document it. And the processes, and they had some personnel turnover. What finally got them going is they collaborated through their system office with UNT, who has a fairly robust program, which is one of the great things that has happened out of the peer review. Because some of this, even using the manual, there's an element of art and science to the inventory. And so it allowed them to really ask the right questions to come up with the most accurate answer.
Okay, thank you.
So my question is a question that I guess sort of get asked fairly often is, if there wasn't a coordinating board, who would do this? And my real question is are there university systems that should be doing this internally in addition to what we're doing as a coordinating board, and how well are our reports received, and what is the response that you receive as well? Are we moving the needle in the proper direction?
The first question, if we didn't do it, who would do it? There is an option available today. They can contract with an outside audit agency. The costs on that would be staggering, and there are very few audit companies that possess the expertise in this process to be able to do it, which is one of the reasons why the peer review team has been so successful. It would be a cost increase of massive proportions. The second question, how are our data received in our feedback received? Quite well. That's a good thing of having a peer review, is that nobody's really headhunting out there. We've certainly not experienced any cases of that. So when they sit down and they talk about it, while there's some discussion amongst it, it really comes down to the fact of having a logical process to be able to come to the determination we have. Now, some have not liked the response. Certainly an institution that's found that they need to do a remedial audit, they don't want to hear that. However, once it goes through the process, they appreciate the increases they have in their data, the efficiency of gathering, and the clarity it comes through at.
Thank you. Commissioner? I'm sorry, Shavid? Yes. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, when you said it barely made it through, what was the major problem? What was wrong with their data?
I would have to pull up all of the data points, and certainly I don't have the entire...
No, just general.
Generally, those institutions, they borrow a lot of space, and they're using different space, different places, and it does count if an institution, it goes on the facilities inventory and is subject to review if an institution is loaned space, say from another entity. It can be a private entity. It could be the Army at Fort Hood. So a lot of times those data points aren't controlled as tightly because they aren't, quote unquote, owned by the institution. And again, a new institution, at the point when they went through that and their subsequent review, it was a relatively new institution going large growth. And sometimes it's timing of when the audit comes and when there's a lot of growth and things catching up like that. Certainly we have confidence that they have the ability and the data based on their results. We think they're sufficiently accurate, and they're going to get better over time. And that's what we've seen with all of our results, is that each time we go through, it just casts the light on it and says this is important. These data just aren't used for us. They're used for indirect cost recovery. And it creates a good auditable line if ever they're called to task on it. And again, going back to Dr. Tescher's question and also answering it again, the impact on this is that they appreciate the fact that they have more accurate data and they can trust their data.
Thank you.
Just as a point of information, Tom, who makes up the peer review teams and how many members are there?
In each peer review team, there are 3 members. One of them is a coordinating board staff member. 2 others are chosen from institutions. We try to keep them relatively geographically close to reduce travel costs. So it's two members from institutions across the state. We try to keep them in relative size because sometimes the complexities involved are different, and the navigation of the campus can be more complicated at a University of Texas versus a smaller school. Not singling out them or any reason, but a large school versus a small school. And then in the event there's a re-audit, a different coordinating board staff member will attend, and a new PRT. So it's a completely new review, and we caution them on the front end, don't look at the other results, go in and do a clean review.
Chairman?
Yeah, and I appreciate that information, Tom, and the question, Commissioner, because I think this is important for us to really understand how this process works and what that, what makes up that peer review team. I mean, do the people that are on that are non-coordinating board staff, do they do this on a regular basis? I mean, what's their level of knowledge and experience to really be able to make the right analysis and recommendations?
These are people that are actually conducting this at the university. The person we pick as the PRT lead is actually a person that's has been audited and has been successful at it, and has also served on a PRT as a PRT team member. So we're confident the level of expertise. Plus, we're there as kind of the neutral arbiter if any of those conflicts arise. I can say with absolute certainty, all benefit of the doubt is given to the institution. The PRTs get together. The team itself gets together privately once the data are collected, review, look at the results, and then actually almost go through a process and say, okay, how can we be wrong here, and how can we give the institution the benefit of the doubt? That's why I'm confident when we say an audit team or an institution needs to go through a re-audit, we've tried to find a way for that not to happen, and we're confident that it's something that needs to happen.
I just want to add that when we first started doing this, it was the staff's recommendation to take the peer team approach. The original approach was going to cost, at least $1 million over and over again, and the additional benefit is that the schools learn from each other. So I think it's proven to be much more effective than the original thought in terms of hiring outside people to do this, and much more cost efficient.
So I only want to express my own personal opinion that peer review is really important for professionals, and I think some of it is volunteerism. You give back because you're going to get a lot more than you give. My question would be, as we look at benchmarks and best practices, how do we publicize that to the rest of the institutions? That we peer reviewed this institution, we found this is really good practice, this is not a very good practice, this is the benchmark, this is where you need to be. Are we publicizing that within the higher ed community, within the state?
The way that if there's a formal report that's done at that level of detail, I would say not currently. But when institutions run into quandaries, if you will, we know where to direct them and say, things like institution X has a very good method for this. Why don't you call them? And going to what Dr. Garner said, and I had the kind of unique position. I was actually on the work group side of this when I was at Texas Tech. And so I had the perspective of the institution and was one of the first institutions to go through this process. The teams were much larger. I think we had 12 people there, but it was one of the pilots, and we wanted to cast a wide net to get the experience. And we had very good processes. However, we found it beneficial that someone else was looking. And so, The publicizing that, is it publicized in a large report or even a moderate-sized report? No, but it's done through presentations. It's done through helping others. And really, the bottom line is, as Dr. Gardner said, it's me looking at another professional that I would have never met otherwise who has an idea. And I can't count the number of times someone said, hey, can I give you a call if I run into problems with this? And say, absolutely. And now we have information web between the institutions, which only serves to standardize things across the state without being some sort of regulatory process.
Was there another question or comment?
I move approval.
We have a motion to approve from Ms. Shepard. Do I have a second? Second. Second from Dr. Farias. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Tom. Excellent report.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. Item number 5B is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to appoint a student representative to the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. I have been informed by staff, who is present, Linda Battles, our Deputy Commissioner, that we need to pull this item and repost it for the March CAP meeting. Is that correct, Linda?
That's correct, and I just want to give you an explanation and sort of a notice to the institutions on this issue. Since 2007, we've been statutorily directed to receive nominations from presidents for student representatives on our advisory committees. And we begin the process in August of every year. The commissioner sends out a notification to the presidents indicating the process, the deadlines, applications, and a list of the committees that we have availability for student representatives. Our deadline for these nominations is December 1, and we started to realize that we didn't have any applications for the Financial Aid Advisory Committee except for one application. So staff went back and looked at the original correspondence, and turned out that we erroneously indicated that there was no availability on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. We do currently have a student representative serving on that committee, but her term expires at the end of May. And so the new term would begin June 1, therefore they would have had to have been in this process. What we're going to do is we are going to send out a new letter tomorrow to the institutions notifying them of the error and requesting nominations again for a deadline of March 1. And we will come to you again in March for approval of a student rep, and then go to the April board meeting for final approval.
So I would like to nominate the individual that did apply for a persistence and perseverance for the first annual Hedgehog Award. Applying for something that doesn't exist and possibly actually getting it despite the fact that we told them there's nothing there.
Right.
All right, let's all laugh about that, but we'll need a motion and second to remove this from the agenda. Can I hear a motion and second?
Motion.
Okay, Dr. Farias, Ms. Shepard, any opposed? Okay, we'll repost this and we'll actually send a congratulatory letter to the individual who was nominated. Please. Moving on to agenda item 5C, consideration of adopting the staff recommendation of the committee to authorize the Commissioner of Higher Education to forward a report on the Texas Grant Program to the governor and members of the legislature in accordance with Senate Bill 28, 82nd Legislature. Dr. Charles Poles, Deputy Assistant, will be available to answer any questions on this report. Charles, do you have any remarks or just available questions?
Just a few remarks, just to give you some context for the report. Senate Bill 28 of the 82nd Texas Legislative Session created an annual report requirement focused specifically on the Texas Grant Program in order to illuminate how the program is utilized in relation to multiple factors, including initial versus continuing awards, race, ethnicity, and expected family contributions of recipients, implementation of the priority awarding model criteria, as well as persistence, retention, and graduation rates. As the priority model is still relatively new in its implementation, insufficient time has passed to report any significant level of data in relation to things such as graduation rates, though the creation of the reporting requirement allows us to build data in these early years of its implementation to enlighten our future observations. With the recent adoption of 60 by 30 texts, this annual report, like our other reports, will be assessed to identify how it can best be utilized to influence and support the 4 key goals of our strategic plan: attainment, completion, marketable skills, and student debt, while still providing the information needed, deemed critical for the legislature. SB 28 initiated the priority model for students graduating after May 1, 2013. The model gives priority for Texas grant funding to students who have demonstrated a greater likeliness of completing a baccalaureate degree. As you see on the screen here, multiple areas were identified that indicate this greater likeliness, such as advanced academic programs, advanced math, etc. So priority is given to those students who meet at least 2 of these criteria. While the report provides multiple tables in its appendices, breaking down the awarded funds across all institutions, let me highlight a few of the statewide details. As you can see in the pie graphs here, the proportion of Hispanic Texas grant recipients continues to grow, while the percentage of white Texas grant recipients declines, which is in line with the change in the overall college-going population. And while the percentage of African American Texas grant recipients has declined from FY12 to FY14, preliminary FY15 figures indicate an increase in this population. This next set of pie charts represents details on the federal expected family contribution of Texas grant recipients over the 3-year period covered by the report. As you can see, the vast majority of recipients have an EFC of less than $5,000, which is roughly the eligibility level for the federal Pell Grant program. 96.3 in FY12, 96.6 in FY13, and 96.8% in FY14 had an EFC of less than $5,000. While there has been a small reduction in the percentage of students with the lowest possible EFC, e.g. 0, this is not a reflection of these dollars being shifted to low-need students. In fact, the amount of funding devoted to high-need students, EFCs of less than $5,000, has in fact increased over the years. One question that is specifically being tracked is whether the introduction of the priority model has a significant impact on the racial distribution of the Texas grants awarded to initial recipients. While there are some small changes noted in these graphs, it's important to note a challenge that exists in these early years of tracking. In addition to the priority model, SB 28 also limited the awarding of initial Texas grants to baccalaureate students at 4-year public institutions, which also required a shift in the allocation of funding to the institutions as well. So there are multiple aspects at play here, even when we limit our review of FY14 data just to public universities. And one of the things I would like to point out is the pie charts that you're seeing here in this presentation are actually somewhat different from the pie charts in the draft report that was sent to you, and that's because the data for FY15 is still preliminary for this information. The financial aid database system, schools are in the process of finalizing their data in the system for FY15, and as they do that, they're able to update the information about their end-of-year reporting. So even between when we created the draft report and when I'm presenting to you now, there has been shifts in the data. In fact, from what you'll see in what was presented to you in the draft report that was sent, the Hispanic and African American were actually reported lower in what was sent to you. And as we've gotten more detail from the institutions, those numbers have been increasing. Finally, as you can see here, there's currently not a significant change in graduation and persistent rates in the data we are reporting. However, this is an area that we will be able to explore in greater detail in future reports as the first group of priority model recipients approaches graduation. And as we focus our reporting specifically on the public universities, given the changes implemented by SB 28. The Texas Grant Program continues to play a critical role in the financing of higher education with a unique focus on public universities. As the priority model moves forward and 60 by 30 Tex is implemented, we will be able to continue our study of this program to identify further improvements to support the college-going culture of our state.
Members, any questions?
I have a question.
Please.
Dr. Fisher. Do you have any comparisons of the differences between public university 6-year graduation rates for comparisons of Texas grant recipients versus those that are not Texas grant recipients?
So Texas grant recipients versus non-Texas grant recipients. Off the top of my head, I am not positive as to whether that's in a data element that we have recorded anywhere. I'm looking at Julie simply. Is it anything like that in the almanac or anything?
And we can get that information.
We can get that, but we don't already produce it somewhere. Okay.
Not off the top of my head that I'm aware of yet.
Okay. We can pull that data. We definitely have the ability to look at that, and that's something that we can pull together. We're also in the midst, and that may be something that we can look at as we develop this report for future years, what would be some of the more useful items to include in terms of comparisons, and that may be something that we want to include both in thinking about this data as well as future data.
I think it's important to look at that, to look at idea, because one of the missions is obviously affordability and accessibility for higher education. And if you have that, you're able to take a look at the significance of the Texas Grant Program versus those that are not on the program. And I think you can get some information on that to kind of make some comparisons that would be helpful, possibly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I can just say historically, we haven't looked at this recently, but it's been a decade since we've run this, but in the past, the students with the highest graduation rates were the students receiving no aid whatsoever, which is sort of logical. But this program is very successful, and we've looked at it in the past. We do need to make this comparison, but it wouldn't be surprising if students who have a lot of financial support on their own and maybe be more advantaged in other ways have a slightly higher graduation rate. But it would be nice if we discover that they've merged, and because these students are very good.
Commissioner?
I'd like to ask a couple of questions. The pie charts that show the decline in Hispanic students receiving Texas grants from 54.3% to 53.2%. Attributable to a greater percentage of students, Hispanic students going to community college?
It could be
Presumably.
attributable to that. It could be that we just don't have finalized data for FY15 because just within a few weeks' time between when we did the initial draft report and this slide, that number increased from something like 52.5, I think, up to the 53.2. So it could be that that number will still increase as we get this data finalized. That's one of the challenges about the timing, is that the FY15 data is all preliminary as we're doing it, while the FY14 data is finalized. But we definitely could see that there may be some change due to the fact that Texas Grant is now being limited, while the pie charts are comparing public universities to public universities. So, the pie charts have been limited that way. The allocation of the funding was significantly impacted by limiting to the Texas Grant, so that may have changed individual institutions in terms of the funding they had available and how they utilized it. So we've tried to normalize for that public university as much as we can, but there are some other factors that may have contributed.
I would emphasize this as a preliminary enrollment, and the data will be most meaningful when we get to the actual enrollment in December, because this can change. The community colleges are typically the area that changes most, and they're not included in this now, as Chad pointed out. But I would wait to form some judgment in terms of where we're going until we get those final numbers. And remember, preliminary enrollments, there seems to actually drop out as well. So I think we really have to wait. And I think we need a big letters preliminary enrollment underneath that chart.
Yeah, and I'd also like to comment. I understand, Dr. Gardner, and that's a good point. But I also would like to commend you and your group for keeping us informed. Many times we get reports on some boards that I'm on that are delayed, and I think this is like real time, and we are the 12th month of the year 15, so I think this is good. I know you've kept up with what's going on, so I want to say that's appreciated rather than waiting another 6 months or 12 months.
My second question has to do with since we still fund the vast majority of eligible Texas grant students. It's still largely the case that the priority model really hasn't kicked in or taken much effect. Do you have any numbers? Can we get any numbers on the number of students who received Texas grants who actually did so through the priority model at their institution?
Let me check real quick to see if I have that handy right here.
Because I'm assuming it's still quite small.
Hold on 1 second. I think I have a chart, but I'm not positive.
If you don't have it readily at hand, you can give me the answer personally later, and we'll report back to the board in January.
Sure, we do have some initial data on it, and I will get that summarized for you to pass along. One of the things that we have information about is the
Priority.
Did you want me to read those to them now? Sorry, I guess I'll present it to you now. So the information that we have in terms of the students awarded via the priority model is just shy of 18,000, 17,987 for the priority model. And for students that are coming in through the basic eligibility criteria, it's just over 9,000, 9,038, for a total of 27,025. So a significant portion,
that's much larger than I thought. That's
are awarded through that.
Good to know.
So thank you for your report. I think those are really kind of important questions. My question on the priority model, how many of the students met at least 3 or even all 4 of the criteria? Because it seems to me that there may be a graduation as you move into, I met all 4, that you may be more ready to be successful and more worthy of a grant. Have you given consideration to that? Has that been stratified? If not?
Currently, we don't stratify at that level. We simply have the institution indicate to us whether they met the priority model criteria. It's just a yes-no indicator as opposed to an indicator of which elements of the priority model that they met. So we haven't done that at this point.
Sure. And the slide you have up here, the problem with looking at that is its percentage, and we don't know numerator, denominator. So that's, I think that there are some opportunities there for us to continue to look at that. And then can we go to the very last slide, because I'm not sure I understand that. So we have 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions, and it seems like we're looking at 6 years of graduation, but why is there such a low graduation level at the community colleges and technical colleges, which is only required a 2-year degree in comparison to the 4-year degree institutions? Can you explain that? Am I not seeing the data correctly?
There's a couple challenges on this slide, which one is that they're both graduation and persistence rates. So it's not just graduating, but also those students who are continuing in. The second is that with the Texas grant numbers, the data for the community colleges and the technical state colleges is actually very limited as we move forward. That program, as it gets phased out. And so there's a couple challenges of how we're comparing, but I think that David might have some additional information that he would like to share.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask a question. Is
okay.
is that the number for the community?
You have to share information before you ask the question. So I got my question in front of yours.
This is related to your question.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Is the community college number actually a 6-year graduation persistence rate, or is it? Because not all students.
Yeah,
Is it to a baccalaureate? Is it to an associate degree? What is that graduation rate? Because typically we don't do a 6-year graduation rate for associate degrees.
I'll have to go back and check how those numbers were put together within the data that was pulled, so I can work with strategic planning and funding to understand the specifics of, what were the filters used on the information to make sure that those are more clearly an indication of, is it just certain groups? Is it a 3-year graduation versus a 6-year? To make sure that we're comparing apples and apples as opposed to apples and oranges.
On the face, I'm not sure, but it looks closer to a 3-year graduation persistence rate from community colleges, but it could be 6 if it's going to the baccalaureate. We just need to affirm what that is.
Yep.
It's an unusual number.
That's the importance of these being drafts while we get these questions, so we can make sure we finalize them before they're fully sent forward.
So, Dr. Poles, thank you for your report, and I think you've heard concerns to perfect the report. In lieu of that, we have to adopt a recommendation to authorize the report to be sent to the governor and members of the legislature. So in lieu of that, I'm expecting that the report will be modified as the questions came forward. Do I have a motion and a second to authorize that? Javid?
Second.
Dr. Farias? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It is authorized. Item 5D, Report on Financial Aid Advisory Committee Activities. Dr. Lisa Blazer, Associate Vice President for Student Affairs, will present a summary of recent activities and is available to answer our questions. Dr. Blazer.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lisa Blazer. I served as the chair of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee this last year, just rolled off as the chair. And I want to thank you for the opportunity. This is the first time we've had an opportunity to present and provide an annual report, and I'm happy to represent the committee as well as the financial aid industry across the state of Texas. This is, I think this committee has really evolved over the past few years. I've been participating for quite some time, and we look forward to a continued dialogue with you and with the board on how we can improve financial aid throughout the state. So I have a few quick slides to go over what we actually accomplished this last year. Oh, it's already moved for me. So just to give you an idea of the committee overview, this is a really quick description of what we do. There's a more detailed one in your actual report. Primarily, we're here to provide advice and recommendations to the coordinating board on how we can improve financial aid programs across the state of Texas. We're kind of the boots on the ground out there at the institutions, and we really want to make those programs work better. And so we're there to provide that advice. And some of the things that Dr. Poles and I have been talking about as we've been developing this annual report, he came up with this great template that we have. It's still evolving as well. Determining the cost and the time spent on this committee, we're going to be moving forward with asking for more information from committee members. I think the important thing to realize as far as the committee members, it's a volunteer opportunity. We do that quite a bit across our associations. We serve in a volunteer capacity, but we don't always take the time to figure out how much time are we spending participating on these committees and providing that feedback. A lot of us do that perhaps perhaps during the day, but then we still need to do our jobs. So that will be something that we'll be continuing to collect data on this next year as we move forward, and we can provide you a little bit more consistent information and more information on how much time is spent, as well as the cost, because it is a cost to the institutions that we are happy to provide because we think it's such an important service to the state of Texas and to our financial aid programs. So we'll be working on that throughout the year. As far as the task, the summary of the task completed, we spend a lot of time talking about the financial aid programs. This last year, we had quite a bit going on in the legislative session since we were in the midst of it during 2015. We spent a lot of time talking about the Texas grant. Dr. Poles has already talked quite a bit about what's happening with the Texas grant. I know in previous years we've talked about the priority model. We were able to provide advice and recommendations as that model was being developed. A lot of discussion was revolved around the Be on Time and the top 10%, since those programs are going away, what that meant for the institutions, and advice on those bills that were moving forward. And I will tell you, one of the things, the work-study off-campus requirement, that bill caught us a little bit by surprise in the financial aid industry during this last legislative session. So we've started the conversation about what that means at the institution level. I would be, we do have some concerns because the allocations are fairly small, and it does take a little bit more administratively to create those off-campus positions. So I'm looking forward to some additional information that I know the coordinating board is researching as we look forward to implementing the off-campus requirements of the work-study program. We had continued concern about the Hazelwood program, most specifically the Legacy program. We all recognize that it's an incredible benefit for our veterans and for their dependents, but it is an unfunded mandate. It is something that we have to take into consideration. There's still a lot of dialogue going on with the TVC and as well as some of the other veterans associations across the state, but it is something that is a concern at our institutions. We want to make sure that we're providing the benefit, but it is a cost to the institution. So we'll look forward to spending more time talking about that. We did finalize the Texas grant rules. There were a lot of changes that we needed to make, looking at, and I call them loopholes, perhaps. Looking at as we look at a limited amount of money, even though the Texas grant program has increased in funding, we still can't fund all of the students that are eligible. I know on my campus that we cannot fund all the students that are eligible on our campus because of the population we serve. So with that in mind, we really need to make sure that we're spending the money on the students that are going to be successful, that are going to be able to move forward in the program, hence the priority model, but then also looking at some of those rules. And I know we had a lot of discussion over the last 2 years about the 150-hour requirement. I kind of looked at that as a little bit of a loophole. We've kind of streamlined those a bit to make sure that we're really aligning the program with getting students through the program in 4 to 6 years and ensuring that we're giving the money to the students that need it the most. We did raise some concern. We did have one negotiated rulemaking process for the Texas grant allocation formula. I was one of those people raising those concerns. There were some issues with how that allocation process happened, and we didn't have as much data as we needed during the first process. We're now currently the new negotiated rulemaking process is underway as we speak. I believe we're meeting in January to have more conversation. And the coordinating board, Dr. Poles, has provided quite a bit of data this go around. I think that particular committee, as well as the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, feels very strongly we really need to look at the data before we make any changes to the allocation formula. But that will be continued discussion as we move forward. And we had quite a bit of discussion. TG has actually been part of a pilot program looking at financial literacy and student loan debt reduction, and that's also part of the 60 by 30 techs as well. So we know that's an important part of what we need to do in the state of Texas. I think we struggle with resources and manpower, and TG is providing a way for us to potentially look at improving financial literacy across the state. So I think that should be some continued discussion as well. They're seeing some really great information coming through that. And then Dr. Poles also introduced, some things moving forward with the new structure here at the coordinating board for supporting the financial aid industry across the state of Texas. So we're looking forward to that as well. As far as recommendations as we move forward, we've struggled with the Financial Aid Advisory Committee makeup. We need to streamline that nomination process. We'll continue to do that as we move forward to ensure that we're getting recommendations from across the state and that particular Financial Aid Advisory Committee is representative of the state of Texas. So I think we've made a lot of headway, but we still need to streamline that process as well. Obviously, we're moving, it seems like we just finished the legislative session, but we're moving into another one for 2017. We just heard a report at this last meeting that on what the coordinating board is moving forward with. We will continue to provide advice on with the legislative session coming up. I think one of the important things we have to do with regards to financial aid is educate the legislators and their staff on financial aid, what it means, and how we can move forward. I think that's one of our key things that we can actually do as a financial aid community, and I think the coordinating board plays an important part in that as well. And then, of course, we'll continue to provide feedback as Dr. Pools moves forward with the new structure for a central office for financial aid. I'm really excited about the Texas Student Aid Handbook, so I'm looking forward to seeing that as we move forward in providing feedback and the reporting requirements. We've had a subcommittee for quite some time that looks at data collection and reporting. You know that there's administrative burden whenever we're looking at reports and everything that we need. We know how important it is to provide that information to the coordinating board because it informs the legislators and the legislative process. It informs what needs to happen with allocations. But we do have to continually look at that process and how we can make that a little bit more streamlined, comparing data from the financial aid database with the CB1 report. So there's all kinds of information that the institutions are providing, and how can we do that better? One of the new things that's happening in the financial aid industry is prior year. If you haven't heard about that, that's at the federal level. We'll be looking at when the student fills out the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form, starting with the 17-18 award year. They're going to be able to submit that FAFSA next October 1st, instead of January of 17, it'll be October of 16 for that upcoming fall. We'll also be looking at prior year data instead of prior year data. One of the things that they've discovered at the federal level is that most students, their eligibility and their income doesn't change significantly from year to year, and it becomes increasingly difficult for students to turn in information from the previous year when a lot of people don't fill out their taxes until late, so they're providing estimates or they're not filling out their FAFSA at all by that March 15th deadline. So I think we're going to have to really look, since a lot of our state programs, a lot of them are based on that FAFSA information. One of the things that we need to do is look at, okay, how is that going to change our priority deadline here in this state, how we receive allocations, what needs to happen there. So that subcommittee is already formed and begun that process. So I think that's going to continue as we move forward this next year so that we can better inform what happens at the state level because of federal requirements moving forward. And then, of course, we'll continue to work with the coordinating board on how we can improve the allocation process. We recognize that especially during a legislative session, it becomes challenging to get the allocations out if we don't know what our appropriations are for the Texas Grant Program. But that is something that if we're awarding early, we want to improve recruitment and retention, and financial aid programs are a big part of that. With regards to enrollment management, the later we receive an allocation, the more difficult it is for us to move forward with ensuring students have enough funding to support their education. So those are some of the recommendations that we have. I would be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
I have a question. Yes. Linda Battles may answer this. The top 10% rule, I was reading in the report in 2009. I mean, there were some changes, but there wasn't funding. Can you, Linda, give us a little update on that? We get some questions, at least I get some questions on that sometimes with the changes. And Dr. Blazer, you may be able to answer this. I'm not sure, but
yes, I'm sure Lisa could answer it too. But yes,
since you're listed in the report, that's Linda. That's why I asked you.
In 2009, the legislature did allocate funding for the top 10% through the appropriations bill, and so we developed rules to administer the program, and over the years, particularly after the 2011 session, there were significant cuts to the top 10% program. And as of this past year, we were awarding $600 awards when the maximum was $2,000. There just wasn't enough appropriations to provide to all the eligible students. In the last legislative session, the legislature opted not to fund the program and to go ahead and wind that program down. So in addition to eliminating the top 10% program, the legislature also eliminated the Be On Time program. And those are two programs that are really targeted to students who are really, they have significant academic requirements attached to those programs. There's also need, but it's at a very lower level, say, as compared to a Texas grant. So a lot of more middle-income students have qualified under those programs. So I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but this has given the commissioner concern because there aren't any state financial aid programs that are now available for those students.
And I would reiterate that as well. I think that's one of the, we understand the appropriations process and the challenges with both of those programs and not enough appropriations. But those two particular programs were available for those middle income kids that aren't eligible. You know, we have a lot of students that aren't eligible for Texas grant that are just beyond the cusp of Pell eligibility, and there's a limited pot of money at our institutions for them and no state programs now for those particular students. So we do need to really look at that as we move forward. What are we going to do for those kids that are just beyond eligibility for Texas grant? We're not talking about the non-need. We're talking about the kids that still have need.
Lisa, as you know, our last session was I think it was a significant session for financial aid because we didn't get nearly as much money as we had requested. Then there was the elimination of Be On Time, and then we talked about the top 10% and other programs. And right now, here at the coordinating board, we're looking at ways that we can spread our limited resources as broadly and as effectively as possible. And you, I'm sure you know that we're thinking of limiting the number of hours for which students can receive Texas grants. Right now, we're at 150. I think the board has felt that's too many given our circumstances, so we ought to reduce that, step it down to 135, maybe go lower, limited tuition fees and books, and recognize there's not much we can do about the cost of attendance. And then figuring out a way to increase the EFC so that we can pick up some of those students who are on the cusp of getting financial aid, but really are needy by any definition of the term. How do you feel about these issues?
Well, actually, you know, with regards to the hours, I think, you know, we made some headway, as I talked about earlier, with the rules, because before, with 150 hours, it was only while you were receiving Texas grants, so a student could potentially take many more hours. So 130 hours, you're a little bit beyond the typical 120-hour requirement, and so if we do have if we had maximum funds, then that would be awesome and we could go a little bit further. But I think in light of the fact that we do have limited funding and we can't award all the students, limiting those hours is a way to go. And then I also think in looking at the EFC, I think the challenge is going to be, if we're moving forward with the Texas grant, I would say from an institutional perspective, the challenge of moving that EFC up, if we're still required to cover tuition and fees with the Texas grant, that could be a burden for the institutions because the Pell does help supplement that. So a combination of the Pell plus Texas grant can equal the tuition and fees. And for most of our students, that is actually true, at least at my institution. If we move beyond Pell eligibility with the EFC, then we might need to change, perhaps look at the changes. Do we really need to are we required to cover tuition and fees, or could it be a flat amount for the Texas grant? I know that our target award is $5,000, but a lot of us are awarding any combination of that. It's not we try to keep our average around 5,000 at UTSA. So I think as long as we keep those things in mind as we move forward and perhaps look at a possible flat amount, that way a student knows if I'm receiving the Texas grant, I'm receiving this amount, or we do it in a tiered way to where someone with a higher EFC gets a lower award than someone with a 0 EFC. So you're still addressing the need component, but you're also providing some type of award to that middle-income kid that's just beyond eligibility for Pell. I think we just have to keep the student and the institutions in mind, considering limited funding resources that we do have.
So a couple of quick questions. So this committee was formed how long ago?
I just typed that somewhere.
I've been coming for a long time.
Well, that's what I was trying to.
I want to say 90, I think 96, 95, 96, somewhere around
97,
there.
I think.
And so did you say you're rolling off?
Well, I just rolled off as the chair.
That's
so
a shame
when
because you seem to be doing a wonderful job.
She'll be
Thank you.
involved.
That's what I'm hoping for. 'Cause
I will still be involved. I'm still, when I've been coming to this committee since I was the TASFA president, which was in 2007. So that's when I started. I was on the committee, and then I still come even when I still came to the meetings, even when I wasn't officially on the committee. It's easy for me to get here, and I want to participate. And so with my role as committee chair in 14-15, I was the vice chair before that. It's a 3-year commitment.
Right.
And so I'll continue to serve as the past chair this year for 15-16. But you are in capable hands with Dr. Chris Murr from Texas State. He's the current chair. And then we'll be making recommendations for the vice chair, and that's Delisa Fox, and she's from Texas A&M. So all of us we're all really invested in what's happening at the state level. So even if I can't be here, I have staff, my director of financial aid, she watches the webcast and she participates in that as well. So I can guarantee you that regardless of whether I'm the chair or I'm serving on this committee, I will make my voice
and I just
heard
want to
so that I participate in that.
And thank you for
that's
that.
That's an important part of what we do.
Well, and I appreciate, and I can tell your passion and commitment to it, and it's greatly appreciated. And y'all's work and guidance is of tremendous value as we're trying to navigate these issues right now. And so I just commend you and the committee on the work that they've done. It's tremendously important and great value. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? So this is a report. It's informational, greatly appreciated. To paraphrase our struggles, it's resources and woman power, not just simply manpower. So
Yes, sir,
I want to echo what the chairman. I want to echo what the chairman just said. I'm hoping that Dr. Ricardo Romo is listening in, and I want to thank him as your president at Roadrunner Nation for allowing your talent to be on loan to us, and best wishes for a happy Christmas to Rowdy and the Roadrunners.
Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas to you all as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 5E is a report on data highlight, student debt data. Dr. Julie Eklund will present the highlights. And before Dr. Eklund presents that, I want to congratulate her on behalf of the board as her appointment on December 1st as Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to serve, and that means I will be here with you presenting our data highlight series for more meetings to come. But today our highlight is on student debt data and related to our student debt goal. So first of all, we have a statewide goal that undergraduate loan debt won't exceed 60% of students' first-year wages. That doesn't mean we expect it to be 60% for all the students or at all institutions, and I'll share a little more on that later about the variation in that ratio. After the plan was adopted, we started to take a deeper dive into the student debt and wage data. In fact, you'll see several things today that we had not prepared for the committee. After the goal was adopted, we decided we needed to look more closely. This data can help inform institutions and other stakeholders regarding strategies to reach the goal, because the more that's known, the better they and all of us will be able to target strategies in ways that best help students. For example, we know that good advising can help students understand the consequences of their choices, whether it be about debt or about course and program selection. And it's important then when students are at the point of choosing majors or seeking a job after graduation that their choices are not limited by excess debt. So we're going to get into the data. As you'll see on the slide, first we're going to look at some data on debt, then we're going to look at data on first-year wages, and then finally we're going to look at some breakouts on the debt to wage ratio that is our statewide plan. So as this chart shows, bachelor's degree recipients have about twice as much debt as associate degree holders at the time of graduation, and about 63% of them have debt. As you're probably aware, there's a target in the plan to keep the percentage of students with debt to no more than 50%. So this slide shows what those percentages look like by level and what the average loan amount looks like. Here we see that at two-year public institutions, students younger than 24 have the least debt and are the most likely to have no debt at all compared to their older counterparts. This data surprised us. We thought it was interesting. And then we looked at the debt also for students at public university, and the story is somewhat different, where you see the students younger than age 24 borrow the most on average. In terms of the percent that borrow for school, you can see the youngest and the oldest borrow, the percentage is the least at 60%, and it goes up for those older students who do graduate. So this is for graduates. The loan averages also vary by ethnicity and gender, and I do want to point out that the center, we've updated the data in the center column here, students with debt. It's incorrect on your handout. I apologize for that. But this information will show you for all students what their debt percentages are and what the average loan amount is. And we're at about 26% overall for all students, a little under that. This slide gives information about students who do not complete in their debt. So we have to track this a little differently than just how we track graduate debt. We took a 2008 cohort, we followed it for 6 years, and we looked to see those students who are no longer in higher education but didn't graduate to see what their debt looked like. And we saw an average loan of $15,000. That's a lot of debt for someone who's not going to have the earning potential affiliated with earning a degree or certificate. And 35,000 students who didn't complete had debt. For those who completed from the cohort, their average is about what our statewide average is. It's a little less because we're just tracking for 6 years. It's also important to note that we know from studies that students who don't complete have the highest loan default rates, for sure. There's a very high rate there compared to those who do. And in a moment, we're going to move into the wage data, but first I wanted to show you that the loan averages are slightly lower when we look at students who we find with wages, and that's part of our ratio is to look at students who we find with debt and wages, and I wanted to share this. And I included the loan amounts for professional, doctoral, and graduate degrees just to show you that we do find higher loan amounts for those students. And sometimes in the press, I think when you hear some of the stories about students' high debt loads, debt amounts, they're talking about graduate students. They do look very different at that level. Those students also earn more money. So we're looking at first-year wages here. They differ by level. You can see for the bachelor's degree, the average is about $38,000. And working down, and it's interesting to note that at the certificate level, students do have higher wages than the associate level. When we look at some of those technical associates, they do go up some. This includes all the associate degrees. The wages also vary by program area, and this slide in the gray bars, it shows the earnings at the 1 year point by degree area. You can see some variation there. And I also added the percent of students with loan to this slide. I think it's interesting to look at. For example, engineering has the lowest percent with loans, and they have the highest wage in their first year. So now we're going to move on to just a little bit of data about the debt goal and our ratio. As I mentioned, it's a statewide average. What we do is we take the undergraduates who have completed a bachelor's, associate, or certificate. We only include completers who have debt and who have wages. And that's one reason why that 50% target is important, because that looks at all students in terms of who has debt. But the goal just looks at the ratio for the students with debt and with wages. And it's not, the 60%, as I said before, it's not intended for every sector and every degree type. As I'll show you, we do see variation there. But it is intended to be an overall goal, and I think an important guidepost for us. So the ratio statewide, as you'll see, it's just about at 60%, and we've seen that for the last few years. It is the goal is a goal that we do not get any higher than that over time. It's where we've been. For bachelor's degrees, we're at 71%, and this is actually 1 year more recent data than we included in the plan. For associate degrees, about 41%, and for certificates, it's about 33% in terms of that ratio. And this data shows that by bachelor's degree area and associate degree area, it shows the ratio for different programs. And I think this is interesting to look at. You can look at areas like psychology, biology, and communications, where you can see it's a very high ratio. The student debt almost approaches the first year salary, and it's less for other areas. Obviously, what the student is making, as well as what they borrow, both pieces go into this ratio. And I think it makes it a useful ratio, because if we have inflation, the ratio will still be appropriate, because we'll assume we'll see it maybe in terms of what students are borrowing, but we would expect that students will be able to make more. And the final data slide shows some of the differences by race, ethnicity, and gender. And the taller bars, not surprisingly, are students at four-year institutions and their ratios. The lower are the community colleges, but you can see that African-American students have the highest ratios. And in terms of the two-year colleges, there's some variability there as well. And in terms of gender, we saw an earlier slide that was interesting, showing that males have a slightly average loan amount at four-year institutions, but they have a lower ratio, which tells you something about what they're earning when they graduate. And then this leads us to our last slide, which it looks a little crowded now because I decided it was important to add this little graphic that you've all seen many times. But we want to be looking at data and having it be useful to us in terms of helping institutions, helping us understand this. And I think one really important thing to understand about this ratio is it depends on several factors. It depends on what students do, students' choices. It depends on what the state does in terms of funding, and in terms of grants and formula funding. And it depends on institutional elements, and so that's why the data is important for all these areas to understand who is borrowing and where we're going. Looking at the breakouts can be very helpful. I think the ratio can help understand things like the value of a degree. If we see that students aren't borrowing a lot, but they're graduating and they're not earning, the workforce isn't valuing their degree, that they're earning less, that tells us something. The amount of debt tells us something, but again, that ratio gives us a little more rich information about where we are in terms of the balance. And this data raised several questions that I think really can inform targets and strategies. One is looking at African Americans and why their borrowing rates are higher, and we've discussed this and talked about things like, well, it could be because more of them attend institutions in urban areas. In looking at this data, we decided we probably need to look at who's choosing to live at home and who's not in terms of different populations and how much that might be affecting what students choose to borrow. But I know our college readiness and success area is doing some outreach to ask some questions about why are we seeing these differences in borrowing amounts and in terms of our ratio for different groups. And the male-female differences are interesting too, and when we've looked at them by age, it was interesting to see that older females borrow more and tend to a higher percentage of them tend to borrow than older males, and that varies by group too. So we're really working to understand these differences. We also know that more exploration is needed on the impact of student pathways. not only on this goal and the ratio, but overall, one of the targets in the goal is to reduce the semester credit hours to degree to just 3 hours beyond what a student needs. So our next step is to dive into looking at students who have more hours over the degree and what that looks like in terms of their borrowing patterns, their debt, that sort of thing. I know we looked at some interesting data on dual credit, showing that students who had taken a lot of hours tended to have lower student loan averages when they graduate. So there's a lot more for us to look at, but it's we're learning a lot.
Great.
So, Julie, what's the plan? I mean, obviously, this lines up completely with the strategic plan as goal number 4. I find this to be very, very valuable information and well done. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I really look forward to hearing back from. So what is our plan for how often we report back to this? I mean, this is one of the key cornerstones of what we're talking about here, and I just want to make sure that this stays in the limelight of what we're thinking about.
And in fact, what we have just been talking about recently, and I'll let David jump in because this is with my staff, and we'll bring it up to the higher level. But we've been talking about the importance of once we get our FY15 data certified, because we're right at the time now where all the graduation information comes in for those people through 15, and all our fall enrollments are coming in. We're building our accountability system. Once we get all that data, we'd like to go ahead and do some baselines for the new plan, because a lot of the data was run when we were establishing this, so we'd like to bring that to you. Here's what the numbers look like now. That will be our baseline. And then the intention is to report to you moving forward year to year on here's where we are on each of our goals. And on our targets that are trackable. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we're going. Here's the areas where we might need some extra work. So certainly to keep you well informed about where we're moving.
I just want to add to that. It's not just keeping track of the movement, but also, as you see from this analysis, learning more and more about the debt. I mean, frankly, you'll start. One thing that's interesting here is we're really, in some ways, marrying marketable skills and debt, and looking at that relationship. You'll see later that the pattern of students will vary. Some students will be getting, to a greater extent, graduate or professional degrees, and you'll see some impact in terms of earnings power, because if you look at we have data on earnings 5 years, 10 years later. Julie, in fact, in terms of her hiring, in terms of to replacement openings, is focusing more on the workforce, that we have that information. So the plan is for us to learn more and for us to share that with you until you say enough is enough.
And I don't know that we're going to get to that point, because this, David, is it's the crux of the matter in so many levels, and having this baseline. And I guess my next question is, we need to be making sure that we're making this information, driving it out to the public. I mean, because this is such a big issue. I was reading Time Magazine, I think it was 2 weeks ago. They did a big story on higher ed debt. And I mean, it's just on everybody's mind, and it's so wise that it's part of our strategic plan. But, and I think our goal of keeping it at 60% is absolutely the right target and the right goal. But we got to keep telling people what that is and making sure that this information is available to the public and so that they can understand it.
One thing we've talked about is reinvigorating what we call our 2-pagers. That gives a really targeted a bit of information out, and to share that with institutions as we go forward. And I know Julie's area and Ginger Gossman and innovation, our innovation area will be doing that. And in fact, we'll find some things where in the past academic quality and workforce hasn't participated directly in that. They will be doing that as well. So and in fact, college readiness and success, we need to do those. In fact, college readiness and success is already trying to weigh in on why older women and African American women have more debt. So this is a total team effort.
Commissioner. Sorry.
Well, very quickly, I think it's clear that this may well be the most difficult of our 4 goals to achieve, and we are going to have to work very hard, but we'll make sure that in the presentations we make to boards of regents and other groups that some of these slides are in the presentation so that people understand what a tough goal this is, but why it's also so essential.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a wonderful report. I just wondering, do you keep a data on repayment either by profession or by ethnicity or anything like that?
We have information, I believe, about defaulted. I'm going to look to our financial services folks who work in the loan areas, but we will look to see what we have and see what we can provide. Yeah.
So this is information only. I think I would probably make, as the chairman of this committee, 2 requests. One is that this be a regular agenda item, and let's repost it as 5D for debt, that it's permanently there. This has been not just my passion, but a passion of other members of this board. It's an integral part of our new strategic plan. The second recommendation I would make is that I'm looking at our website. There's 60 by 30 TX right up front there. Maybe what we need is a little dashboard up there saying more information about student debt and the other major goals of 60 by 30. I'll leave that to the web designers because I can't possibly even design that site, but that might be an opportunity there for students and parents and those that are funding this to understand what works, what doesn't work, because we need to be absolutely, Chairman is exactly right, transparent about this. If we have information that needs to be disseminated out there, people need to understand that you just can't borrow this. This is not, the balance isn't going to come due someday. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll move on to item 5F. This is a report on the history and current state of post-secondary correctional education in Texas. Dr. Ginger Gosman, our Senior Director of Innovation and Policy Development, is going to provide a brief presentation and be available for questions. This is informational only. Dr. Gosman.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm about to present some information to you that staff at the coordinating board are not well versed in. And the reason we're not well versed is because this program of correctional education does not fall under the purview of the coordinating board. It comes out of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So I have to say thank you to Pam Carey at the Department of Criminal Justice for helping me with this, as well as Donna Zuniga at Lee College and John Bethscheider from Alvin Community College. So why am I talking to you about this? There's been recent national attention to post-secondary correctional education because of a new federal pilot called the Second Chance Pell Pilot. So this is being implemented as part of the Experimental Sites Initiative out of the USDE. And it basically reads, incarcerated individuals who otherwise meet Title V eligibility requirements and are eligible for release in about 5 years could access Pell Grants to pursue post-secondary education and training. So this is not a new idea. All inmates were Pell eligible for over 20 years. Indeed, Senator Claiborne Pell, the father of the Pell Grant, called the diplomas a crime stopper, arguing that it costs much less to educate a prisoner than it does to keep one behind bars. Given this federal policy, we at the coordinating board felt it was important to understand what's happening in Texas related to post-secondary correctional education and funding. Even though we don't know yet if any of our Texas institutions have applied to be part of this experimental sites program. The institutions who have applied will be announced in the next few months. So post-secondary correctional education began in Texas in about 1965. And one of the big initiatives that the state put forward came in 1996, which came with the Post-Secondary Correctional Education Funding. And it's called the Post-Secondary Education Reimbursement Fund. And this is a loan program for incarcerated students. And I'll describe this a little bit more in a few minutes. So who can attend? This is pulled from House Bill 1, which is our general appropriations bill. Inmates are eligible to enroll in higher education if they, 1, meet all academic requirements of the college and the state, meaning the TSI, and 2, if they meet all the security clearance requirements of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Inmates don't have to meet TSI, but they do have to take the assessment, and the post-secondary reimbursement funds that I mentioned a moment ago can be used to pay for developmental education courses. So the security clearances that the Texas Department of Criminal Justice has means they set 2 criteria. 1, that inmates cannot have any major disciplinary issues, and 2, that inmates present little to no security threat within the prison environment. So the state will pay for enrollment in academic courses each semester. According to Lee College, inmates can use these post-secondary education reimbursement funds to enroll in 2 courses a semester before they have to explore other payment options. So these reimbursement funds are not grant funds. They are loan dollars. The 74th legislature created a statute that requires each inmate to repay the state for the loaned amount as a condition of their parole. And that began in 1996, like I said. So offenders who want to take more than 2 courses have to use other payment options. Assuming that one of our Texas institutions participates in the Second Chance Pell pilot, suggests to us that these Pell grants could be used to reduce the amount of the education loans that they take, or they also could supplant the other payment options that inmates have to use to pay for post-secondary enrollment. And to the best of my knowledge, inmate students pay the same costs as any other student in the state. As the coordinating body for post-secondary correctional education in the state, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice contracts with individual community colleges and universities for their services. These contracts cover tuition and operating costs. As for any student, contact hours are included in formula funding allocations. There are 8 community colleges and 2 universities currently contracted to provide this kind of education. And this is where the coordinating board impacts inmate students, because these students are enrolling in programs that we approve. The programs that are offered in prisons are not especially designed for inmates. They are programs from the general curriculum for all students. So as of fall 2014, Texas was serving about 4,300 inmate students, which is about 3% of the state's prison population. And the prison population is about 145,000. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Go ahead.
I have a question. What is the I-25 Inmate Trust Fund?
Yes, so that was under one of the other payment options, and I don't have a lot of information about what that can be used for, only that I know it can be applied to pay for enrollment.
Is that a state fund or a federal fund?
I do not know, but I can find out.
Are there many scholarships out there?
I did not see any. But it is listed as a payment option. If an institution were to choose to offer a scholarship to an inmate, it is possible.
So here's my question. The role of the coordinating board will be to either the contracted institutions you have listed here, we don't have to approve those, or we would just audit them or receive reports or data. What is our role?
So our role, as I mentioned, is we have purview over the programs that these students will be taking, because they're programs that we approve for all students or at the institutions.
Not at the community college level, right? The community colleges don't bring their programs to us.
They do.
They do? Oh, okay.
They're approved at the staff level.
I see. Okay.
Otherwise, our role is minimal. We don't have any direct impact on inmate education. Okay. We are actually would be the body that would provide data to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice about enrollment or about graduation.
We felt that as this was being discussed nationally, that we should at least be aware of what's happening in Texas, and if we have any role at all, just as you're asking. But you may act, when you're at home, someone may ask you about this plan, and we didn't want you to not have any knowledge of it whatsoever.
Please.
Let me understand. These are not courses that are specifically designed for inmates.
No.
And secondly, so I assume that the bulk of the courses they take are online.
They can take online courses, but as I understand it, a number of these institutions have outreach,
They do have outreach, yes.
and they'll send faculty to.
We have one institution present that actually offers these programs.
That would be
if you'd
wonderful.
like
If you
to.
have, yes, please.
Could we ask them, if they're visitors here with expertise, to please come forward? Because I do have some questions on this. I think there's great opportunity here, and I'd certainly like to hear what you are doing or planning on doing in this arena.
Yes.
If you don't mind, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm Dr. Carl Stockton. I'm the provost at University of Houston Clear Lake. And I happen to have the dean, Dr. Rick Short of the School of Human Sciences Humanities, in which this program is offered through here. We're here for the academic meeting, but perfect opportunity. We do bring face-to-face courses in conjunction with Alvin Community College to the prison. So our faculty go directly to the prison. They teach regular courses. They're no different than any other course that's offered on our campus. And the inmates take those courses, and if they meet the standard, they graduate. And we actually have a graduation ceremony at the prison once a year.
What do they typically get their degree in? Is there a tilt one way or another?
Our offerings are necessarily pretty limited. They can earn a bachelor's degree in behavioral sciences or a bachelor's degree in humanities. They can earn a master's degree in literature or humanities. That's all we offer.
And do you have some statistics on tracking your graduates as they re-enter the unincarcerated life?
Our statistics are pretty old. We're working with the Department of Criminal Justice to secure new statistics. Those are hard to come by. But our old statistics suggest that the recidivism rate is cut like by 80%. It's very dramatic.
Yeah,
It's dramatic.
I see giant opportunity here. I mean, giant opportunity. Now, you're coordinating with Alvin Community College?
Correct.
Is that, what about the other 6 institutions that we're contracted with? Is there a consortium where you're talking to each other, best practices, what's working?
We're not communicating with the other institutions. This program has been at the University of Houston Clear Lake for quite a while, and it's been a very successful program. And particularly with Alvin Community College, they go in and teach the first 2 years, and the inmates get their associate's degree, and then they determine whether they want to continue on for their bachelor's and master's. It's amazing to see these inmates when we go through the graduation ceremonies with the families on one side, and they're so proud that they've kind of made it. And it's a sad situation because I think they've kind of reflected back how they could have done things different in their lifetime. We have the student inmates actually be the commencement speakers as well, and so it's really kind of a proud moment for everyone. In answer to your questions, we can try to get the data, and when we go back, I wasn't prepared today to present the data, but we can try to see data and give it and send it up here to the coordinating board.
So my question to the commissioner, is there an opportunity to have a committee or a group of like-minded individual institutions to share best practices? Because I know in my long journey in education, there's 2 ways to learn. You can learn by your mistakes, or you can learn by other people's mistakes, and the latter is a lot less painful than the former.
We will take a look at it. This is really the first time I've learned very much about our involvement in this, but we'll take a look at what we can offer, what value added we can provide, and we will report back to the board.
And
I can imagine that lawmakers would be very interested in hearing of your success.
Okay. And we can provide the data. How many,
as would the citizens of this state.
well, thank you. And we can provide the data, how many students have graduated, and et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have any participation idea as to what those look like right now, or did I miss that? Or
I actually do have some information, if you would like. Oop, no, I don't.
I can tell you,
I have some information, but not at hand.
just off the top of my head, without going back and looking at the data, probably at the bachelor's level, we graduate somewhere around 20 to 25 bachelor's students a year in that program. And at the associate's degree, I think there are probably 15 to 20. So each graduation, we have about maybe 40 inmates that graduate. And it depends on how many courses they can take at a time in terms of the graduation, but they're very dedicated students.
Well, and I would imagine that one of the areas that might be ripe for opportunity is technical skills training and certification. That would be the low-hanging fruit. My personal belief, I mean, the fact that you're getting bachelor's degree graduates is amazing.
And masters.
And masters. Yeah, so I want to commend you and thank you for being here. And if you had any other questions or comments, there was a comment over here.
I was just going to say that we see great value in this program. The students in these programs, as Dr. Stockton indicated, are quite dedicated and quite capable. Small group, they're earning degrees that are not technical in nature. You might say, what does a degree in humanities do for these people? But the education itself is very important to them and very important, I think, to the state of Texas.
And
Javid?
Based on your experience, those people who graduate either with a 2-year degree or 4-year degree, do they become very productive citizen and don't come back to prison, repeat prison, or is that true or not?
That is true. Again, our data are somewhat old. We're working with the Department of Criminal Justice to collect new data, and we certainly can provide that just as soon as we get it.
But I can add that one of the reasons the Second Chance Pell pilot is being pushed forward now is because the Department of Education asked RAND to conduct a study for them, a meta-analysis to look at recidivism rates related to correctional education. Now, it's not just limited to post-secondary correctional education, but they find that there's a plethora of research out there that demonstrates with evidence that education in prison reduces recidivism by around 60%, if not more.
Please.
And one last comment. I think the key to success for our program is the faculty. We have very dedicated faculty that are committed to go out to the prison, which is probably a good hour drive, once a week to teach the courses, and they're very vested in the success of those students. So I think that's a big key to the program.
Are they also doing some advising of career track or educational tracks?
We have a director-level person who handles all of the advising for the prison and serves as our prison contact as well. So faculty don't do much advising. It's all handled in a central location.
So you brought up a barrier, which is an hour drive. Are you doing this because you're located near a correctional institution, or is there opportunity for those institutions near a correctional institution to sort of adopt, if you will, and benchmark and best practices these type of programs?
We're the closest four-year institution to that prison, and Alvin Community College is, I think they're about 10 miles or so from that prison, so they're the closest community college. And we've chosen, obviously, it's best practices to teach them face-to-face and get to know the faculty, and that's how we choose to do that.
Good. Chairman?
I have just another question. Maybe I didn't catch it. You had contracted institutions. What exactly is a contract? Are they contracted with the federal government in order to be in the Pell program, or did we didn't contract with them, right?
No, we did not. So these institutions are contracted directly from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I don't know what the selection process is like.
That was really what I was.
So I can try and find out more about that. But we don't have any role in that process at this point.
And so the Corrections Department identified them to us. Is that how we got this information?
Yes. Pam Carey from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice emailed me this list.
Okay.
So the fact that this is now a national story is news. It may not be new. I was the former vice chair of the Texas Youth Commission, and I can tell you exactly what you said, sir. Recidivism goes down dramatically when we educate. They're getting an education inside of the facility. It's not the right kind of education, so we have to fill that vacuum with something that gives them marketable skills and employability when they leave so that they don't fall in the same pattern. And that was with felony convicted youth. And so I can't imagine it being any different if they're adults. And in fact, they probably have families that are going to rely on them to not make the same mistakes. So I would really challenge staff and Commissioner. I'm really excited about this. I don't want to have the national story drive us. I want to drive a national story. I want us to become the leader in this. I think there's an opportunity for the Department of Correctional Justice to be able to say, we need to have a institution adopt, a 2-year and 4-year institution to adopt every one of these correctional facilities, to become the model, and let's do this in a way that really will benefit our citizens, our incarcerated citizens, and their families and our future. I think that our taxpayers deserve nothing less than the best.
We will follow up.
Thank you, sirs. Thank you. Dr. Gossman, thank you. Item Agenda 5G is a report on facility projects submitted to the Coordinating Board. Dr. Julie Eklund is available for answer any questions. Are there any questions of Dr. Eklund?
And all these projects did meet the standards.
All projects met the standards. Any questions? Seeing none, this is informational only. Item Agenda 5H is a discussion of draft legislature recommendations for the 85th Texas Legislature. Our Director of External Relations, Mr. John Wyatt, will provide an overview of our draft legislative recommendations for discussion. This is informational only.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning, I'm going to update you on where we stand in terms of developing our legislative policy recommendations for the 85th Legislature. You should have in your materials a spreadsheet that looks like this. And this is a summary of the initial staff recommendations that you discussed at the October board meeting. So these are not in any priority order. They're simply organized by topic. So we have them organized by agency roles and tools, student financial aid, higher education funding, and then additional recommendations. As you may recall, our timeline for developing legislative recommendations calls for final adoption at the April 2016 board meeting. Our goal is to use the time that we have between now and that board meeting to solicit feedback and input from the various stakeholders who have an interest in our recommendations, institutions of higher education, legislators, office holders, the business community, the groups that are going to be most directly impacted should our legislative recommendations be enacted. And that has been what External Relations has been doing. Just to give you an update on our outreach efforts, we have met with, at a staff level, with state leadership offices, including the governor's office, lieutenant governor, speaker, as well as key legislative offices, so those legislators who serve on relevant committees. We have secured or are securing meetings for the Commissioner and Chairman Jenkins directly with key office holders. The Commissioner has spoken with several legislators recently, and just yesterday, Chairman Jenkins, Dr. Tischer, and the Commissioner met with the Governor's staff to discuss particularly one of our recommendations that I'll be talking about shortly. We've also met with governmental relations staff from the university systems and the non-system institutions, with representatives of ICUT, the independent colleges and universities, and the Texas Association of Community Colleges. We've also included discussion of these draft recommendations in our briefings that we conduct before every board and committee meeting with governmental relations staff. And finally, we have presented to various stakeholder and advisory committees. As Dr. Blazer mentioned, we had what I thought was a very good discussion at the Financial Aid Advisory Committee last week. We've also presented to the Community Community and Technical College Leadership Council regarding our recommendations. This has been helpful because it's allowed us to speak directly to those stakeholders at institutions who are particularly impacted. As I mentioned, you have the spreadsheet in front of you with all of our recommendations, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on anything in particular. However, I would like to highlight a few recommendations, given our limited time, where we've gotten particular feedback that's important to be aware of. Our first recommendation is regarding coordinating board processes to coordinate the expansion of higher education. This issue has gotten a fair amount of coverage in the press recently. There have been several instances where institutions are either proposing substantial new programs, such as a medical school, or they're proposing to offer programs in a new geographical area, one that's already served by an existing institution. As you may recall, the concern that's been expressed is that we need to have a process in place so that the state can fully evaluate these programs to ensure that they do not create unnecessary duplication of existing programs, that they don't stretch state resources beyond what the legislature is able or willing to fund, and that they don't lead to a weakening of existing programs and thereby institutionalize mediocrity. And what's important is also that this review happens before these institutions have committed substantial state resources and student resources to the development of these programs, i.e. the coordinating board needs to be involved on the front end of these decisions. The commissioner has received correspondence from several legislators expressing a specific concern regarding the UT system acquisition of land in Houston. However, it's important to note that what we're talking about here is not about any particular situation. It's not about trying to react to a specific something in the press, but rather to make sure that the process we have in place regarding any institution wishing to expand takes into account the state's interest in avoiding duplication and stretching limited resources. This has obviously been an issue of high interest to legislators. In our meetings with legislative offices and stakeholders, they've expressed an interest in making sure that we do have a process that ensures these issues are adjudicated on the front end. There's obviously a desire for the coordinating board to be involved in this process. Currently, the staff is working to develop multiple options for how we can address this. Specifically looking at our current programs approvals process as well as our regional planning process and seeing is there a way we can strengthen those processes to ensure that we're reviewing these new programs adequately and in a timely manner. As I mentioned, the commissioner is meeting with key office holders as well as Chairman Jenkins to make sure that we understand where they are on this and that any recommendation that we move forward with is going to have their support. The next recommendation I'd point out is under our Achieving the Goals of 60 by 30 through Student Financial Aid. Actually, the Commissioner and Dr. Blazer did a good job talking about these recommendations already, so I'll be very brief. The recommendation we have for Texas Grant is to limit eligibility from the current 150 semester credit hours to 135 or 15 semester credit hours beyond your degree requirements. So for your typical 120-hour degree, that's 135, but we do have degrees that require more than 120 semester credit hours. The idea with that requirement is both to create an incentive for students to complete in a timely manner and to make those funds available for students that currently aren't receiving Texas Grant. We do have a recommendation to raise the expected family contribution limit to capture more middle-income students. As has been mentioned, this is a reaction to the elimination of Be On Time and Top 10%, which were used by institutions to capture students higher up on the EFC ladder. And then finally, we have a recommendation to expand eligibility to summer school students. Currently, those taking a class during the summer don't have access to very much financial aid at all. Federal Pell Grants are not, do not cover summer school, and currently state financial aid programs do not cover summer. This was a topic of discussion at the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Some of the concerns that they raised were particularly that without a infusion of additional funding, the impact of some of these recommendations may be pretty limited. The staff does estimate that if the SCH limitation had been in place in 2014, it would have freed up about $9 million that could have been allocated to otherwise eligible Texas grant recipients. And that's a substantial amount. But if you look at the overall size of the Texas grant program and the need out there, there is a substantial unmet need that isn't being funded right now. Now, I will mention, and I mentioned to the committee, that the board will be developing its legislative appropriations request as a separate but connected process to this. So we will certainly be making a request for additional Texas grant funding as we move forward. We've also heard a concern from a couple of legislative offices regarding the impact this would have on that student who's at or approaching the 135-hour limit. And the question was raised, do we really want to cut off that student when potentially they're getting so close to graduation? Now, in developing the recommendation, we can certainly look at options such as how we roll this out, whether you want to include any sort of grandfathering in it. But the larger point is that we really need to have something in place that says to the student up front, here's the expectation in terms of what your time frame is for graduation. I'll mention a couple of other issues quickly. Under our Achieving the Goals of 60 by 30 through higher education funding, there will be a recommendation for outcomes-based funding for universities. As you all know, this has been an issue for the board for several sessions now. The General Academic Institution Formula Advisory Committee has come to a unanimous consensus on a recommendation at their last meeting. Just briefly, the recommendation is to create a graduation bonus for institutions, which would award them $600 for every baccalaureate degree that they award. However, every baccalaureate degree to an at-risk student would be worth $1,200 to create an incentive to focus on those students who need the help the most. That recommendation will be presented to the commissioner early next year. And then the board will hear both the committee's recommendation and, should the commissioner have any additional recommendations, in the March and April committee and board meetings. And then I'll mention one additional recommendation under additional recommendations. The board is looking to move forward with its community college baccalaureate recommendation. You may remember this was recommended last session. Did not make it across the finish line, and we're looking to offer this recommendation again. Both the House and the Senate do have interim charges related to community colleges offering four-year degrees. So those interim hearings are likely to start up probably in early spring of next year.
And John, I've already heard from several community college campuses, individual institutions, as well as at least one system, and they've let us know that they're going to aggressively pursue authority to offer baccalaureate degrees.
Sure. And I was going to mention at the Career and Technical College Leadership Council, we had a very robust discussion about this recommendation, and particularly those community colleges who are in regions that see a pretty desperate workforce need for baccalaureate credentialed, particularly nurses. Are very interested in aggressively pursuing this policy next session.
And early childhood education in the Dallas area.
Yes, sir. And one of the things we're working on at a staff level is to making sure we have the latest data to be able to demonstrate the workforce need for these credentialed workers. That is my brief overview, but I am happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Questions? Commissioner, the folks that have contacted you, have we offered opportunity for them to submit what they think their needs are, and for staff to do some due diligence on that and be able to provide more robust comment on the real needs?
I think it's still early. I'm unaware of any firm proposals from the community colleges, either in terms of fields or in terms of a particular strategy. I've just been informed that offering baccalaureate degrees will be a high priority for them. So we will work with them closely. I'm meeting this afternoon with the new president of the Texas Association of Community Colleges. I'm sure that will be an issue that comes up.
Sure, and I guess there's probably institutions present as well as those that are tuned in. And I think my message to them is a message I've heard from you and the chairman is that the sooner you give us your needs and your ideas of where you might go, I think the better we can use the robust resources available here at the coordinating board to help define the need, define what is available within the region and the gap, and how you as a higher education institution might be able to fill that. So I would invite people to coordinate with us so that we can coordinate with them, because the legislature is going to look to us for an opinion on this, and I would hate for staff to be caught in the middle of a legislative session trying to study an issue that we could have been aware of well in advance.
And I'll echo Dr. Tischer that this was a charge to both the Senate and the House Higher Education Committees to examine during the interim. So we can expect to have those questions asked, not in the session, but as early as February or March when they have those hearings.
Right, and I can tell you this, we don't presuppose what the answer is going to be. We just want to get to the right answer.
Correct.
And then the last thing I would want to emphasize, the priority number 2 under additional recommendations, is that I believe this board and the staff is still fully committed that GME remain at a 1.1 to 1 ratio of those that are graduating from osteopathic and allopathic schools in this state to those that would allow at least 110% enrollment in graduate medical education. We're very firmly committed. We're bringing some new medical schools online here in Austin as well as in the Rio Grande Valley, expanding others in other areas. And GME is a critical component for that, and I think that really needs to be emphasized as a top priority for us. It's not changed. There's nothing different about that. And I believe that the legislature has been educated by our studies on this, and they understand that we really need GME much more so than we need UME.
I would agree with that, and I would say the legislature has shown very large interest and a dedication to increasing residency. The important thing is to keep that momentum going.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I suspect that given current events, the desire of institutions to build more medical schools, schools of osteopathy, and the interest of a number of community colleges to offer baccalaureate degrees, I think that these first 2 items under additional recommendations will rise in importance over the spring.
I just wanted to reassure the folks at home that nothing's changed about that 1.1 to 1 ratio, and that's really got to be a top priority. I'd personally like to see it higher than 1.1, but I'm willing to be at 110%. That's a good start. Any other questions? John, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 5I, number 1, consideration of Commissioner's recommendation to the committee proposing a new section to Chapter 5, Subchapter A, General Provisions, Section 5.10, concerning tracking career information for graduates of Texas medical students, medical schools and persons completing medical residencies in Texas. Dr. Julie Eklund is going to review this. It relates to Senate Bill 295 of the 81st Texas Legislature. And this is, this requires adoption.
Yes, as per that bill, the coordinating board is required to establish a system to acquire and maintain data regarding the initial residency program choices made by Texas medical school graduates. Most of that information we already collect from the Texas Medical Board, and we have developed an MOU with them, but there are a couple of additional data elements we will be collecting from institutions. We did have a comment on this rule, and so Stacy is here to explain that briefly and to answer any questions as she's been working closely with this.
Dr. Silverman.
Yes.
Good morning. I am here to talk about the comment that we received. Texas A&M University Health Science Center was concerned that they would have to begin collecting data and information on their medical students and their residents when they entered their practices. This is not the case. We will not be asking our medical schools to report the practice locations of their students or their residents. We will obtain that information from the Texas Medical Board, their physician licensure data. So we have entered into an MOU with the medical board, and we do have their data, and we'll get it annually. So we will continue to update that.
So, members, just so you understand, because it took me a little while to have this explained to me, the reason that we're writing the rule the way we are is not that we're going to burden the medical schools with collecting all of the data. The vast majority is available from the medical board, but when we don't have that availability from the medical board, we will have to get the additional data sets, the subsets, maybe just one even piece of information from the medical schools. So we're not anticipating burdening them with additional data reporting, but when we cannot get it from the medical board, we have to get it from somewhere, and that would be the medical schools. So the rule is written such that the vast majority of the data will be dumped from the medical board. We have an agreement with them. Things are working very well, but there will be critical elements, or one element, I understand, that has to come from the institutions. Is that true?
That's correct, Dr. Tischer. We've got the actual match data, which the institutions already collect. They just don't currently report it to us. They'll be reporting it to us now.
So any questions of either of the doctors presenting this? If not, I'll need a motion and a second. Motion from Javid. Chairwoman, seconds. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Thank you, Dr. Silverman. Agenda item 5I2 is consideration of adopting Commissioner's recommendation of committee relating to amendments to Chapter 21, Subchapter J, multiple sections, and new proposed section of the board rules regarding the Physician Education Loan Repayment Program. Dr. Charles W. Pulls, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, is available for any questions. This will require a motion and a second and an adoption. Dr. Pulls, any comments?
For items 2 through 6, I don't have any comments. I'm just here in case you need me.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Not seating. I hear a motion to approve from Janelle.
Second.
Second over here from Dr. Farias. All in favor, say aye. Aye. It is adopted. Item 5I3 is Commissioner's recommendation regarding Chapter 21, Subchapter M, multiple sections regarding the Texas College Work-Study Program. Again, any questions? Seeing none, a motion to approve. Moved by Dr. Farias, second. Javid, seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It is adopted. Item 5I4 is consideration and adoption of Commissioner's recommendation committee regarding amendments to Chapter 22, Subchapter K, multiple sections, including one new regarding provisions for scholarships for students graduating top 10% of their high school class. Any questions? Motion to approve, please. Javid?
Second.
Seconded by Janelle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It is adopted. Item 5I5, consideration of adopting Commissioner's recommendation to committee regarding amendments to Chapter 22, Subchapter L, Section 22.235 Board Rule concerning the Texas Grant Program. Any questions? Seeing none, motion to approve.
So moved.
Dr. Farias, second by Janelle Shepard. All in favor, say aye. Aye. It is adopted. Item 5I6 is consideration of adopting Commissioner's recommendation to the committee regarding amendments to Chapter 22, Subchapter M, Section 22.261 of Board Rules regarding the TEOG. Any questions? Seeing none, motion to approve. Janelle? Javid? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It is adopted. Item 5J is adjournment. There is no further discussion. We'll need a motion to adjourn, and I've been informed by the chairman of the cause that we will reconvene at 10 minutes after the hour for the cause meeting. So a motion to adjourn. It's moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.